Hey guys, it's Bella. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to part 2 of this insane case. If you missed part 1, I will link it down below for you to watch because I don't want to bore you guys with a recap if you've already watched part 1. But basically we left part 1 off with Dave Krupa having been harassed by his ex-girlfriend of 2 weeks, and she wasn't just harassing him, she was harassing girls that he was dating, she was harassing his on-again, off-again girlfriend Liz Goya. The harassment has been going on for 2.5 years by this point, and Dave had just kind of resigned himself to the fact that this is just something that he has to live with. This is just something that he has to deal with because, you know, he'd obviously reported it to the police, but nothing has happened. They couldn't locate CARI. They couldn't do anything about it, basically, and the case had just gone cold. But then finally, after 2.5 years of harassment and stalking and threats, these 2 detectives picked up the case, and thank God they did, because they finally managed to get down to the bottom of all of this craziness. Before we get into the case, I just quickly want to thank today's sponsor, Majuri, for making this video possible. I am so obsessed with Majuri. It's where I get pretty much all of my jewelry. So if you ever see me wearing anything cute, like cute necklace, earrings, rings, bracelets, anything, you can probably guarantee it's from Majuri. Honestly, when Majuri first reached out to me, I kind of had to pinch myself because I was so incredibly excited because I have just been obsessed with them forever. Their pieces are just so timeless and beautiful and classic and can be worn every day, and they're amazing quality too, so you know they're going to last you a really long time. They also release new pieces every week, every Monday, so if you ever want to refresh a collection, there's always something new for you to go and have a look at. These pieces that I'm wearing today are like my go-to everyday pieces. They just go with everything and they just make me feel so much more put together, and I feel like they really elevate a look. So I've got the boyfriend bold chain necklace on, which is such a staple in my opinion, and then I've also got on the diamonds line necklace, which is so simple and just so incredibly beautiful. And I've also got on the curb necklace, which I've put the moonstone sphere pendant on, and these 3 necklaces truly go so well together, and they also go really well alone if you just want to wear one of them, 2 of them if you want to add a different Majuri piece to the mix. And then for earrings, I've got on the midi hoops. These are such a staple, just gold hoop. I've got the pave diamond midi hoops on, and then also the pave diamond U hoops, which, oh, I can't even tell you how much I love these and this ear stack. And then I've also got this ring, which is my favorite ring to wear every day. It is the duo ring, and honestly I never really used to wear rings that much until I found this one, and now I want a whole collection of them. I want one for every finger. And then I also have on the bold bangle here, which is such a beautiful, just classic bangle. Honestly, these are just such classic, timeless pieces that I wear all the time, so I will link all of them in the description down below for you guys to check out. And thank you again to Majuri for sponsoring this video, and let's go ahead and get into part 2 of this insane case. So like I said, finally in the spring of 2015, so 2.5 years after Dave started getting harassed and stalked and threatened, back in Iowa, these 2 detectives named Jim Doty and Ryan Avis have heard about CARI being missing. Now, keep in mind, this is in Iowa, so they don't know about the stalking and all of that sort of thing. But they heard about CARI being missing. It's been 2.5 years now, and they just thought it was weird that this single mom, who was obviously very involved in her kid's life and called her mom every day, has just randomly up and left. It just didn't make sense, and they thought, you know, there's got to be more to this. So they went and asked if they could look into this case, and, you know, they get the go-ahead, and they start looking into it with fresh eyes. And honestly, thank God for these 2 detectives, because for the last 2.5 years, no one has really taken this case seriously. Just keeps getting palmed off. Everyone just keeps being like, oh, you know, she's gone off her meds, she's gone off the rails, that sort of thing, not really looking into it. So they start off by having Detective Doty trying to prove that CARI is dead, and having Detective Avis trying to prove that she's alive, and for the life of him, Avis just could not prove that she was alive. No one had seen her, no one had spoken to her on the phone, no one had heard her voice, and her bank account hadn't been touched in the past 2.5 years, which is obviously really bizarre for a grown woman because She's gonna need money to live, to eat, to rent a place, whatever. It's very bizarre for a grown woman not to use any money out of her account. And also the text she's sending her mum and her son and her friends, like nobody thinks that they're actually CARI. They're just not the way that she would talk. There was a lot of grammatical errors. There were a lot of spelling errors that just CARI would not normally make. Her mother Nancy was convinced that something terrible had happened to her, and she was just really frustrated because for the past 2.5 years, no one had really done anything about the fact that she believed her daughter was missing and that something had happened to her. Detectives Avis and Doty knew that she had bipolar disorder, but they didn't believe that this had anything to do with why she went missing. And like I said, for the life of him, Avis just could not prove that CARI was alive. So this was really a turning point in the case because it went from a missing persons investigation that no one was really looking into, and now the detectives are contemplating whether or not she has actually been dead this whole time. So they start looking through the case file and they're looking through everything the previous detectives had, and the one thing that immediately sticks out to them is that this random woman, Liz Goyer, keeps popping up. She had never had anything to do with CARI at all, and then as soon as she goes missing, her name is all through these reports and she's all of a sudden the focus of CARI's harassment. So they decide to get their colleague named Anthony Carver, who is a digital forensic administrator, to help them out with all of the digital stuff. And both Liz and Dave had actually agreed to have the contents of their phone downloaded back in 2013 when they reported that CARI was harassing them to help the investigation or help find her or whatever, just, you know, to get the harassment to stop. So Carver goes through, you know, their phone dump, and he finds that CARI has sent him over 15,000 emails in the last 2.5 years, and anywhere from 25 to 50,000, potentially more, texts. And by this point, the detectives have changed their mind, right? They don't believe that these texts are actually being sent by CARI, so they're like, there's got to be some way that we can get to the bottom of this and find out who is actually sending these texts. So as they're going through Liz's phone, they look through her photos and they find that Liz actually has a photo from 2013 of CARI's Ford Explorer car, and the metadata showed that this photo was actually taken a month before police recovered the car. So somehow Liz knew where CARI's car before the police even knew where it was. And then they also found that Liz had actually called CARI 6 times back in 2013 using the *67 prefix, which basically like hides your caller ID. And the police are like, well, that's weird, because didn't Liz claim that the only time she had ever met CARI is when they passed each other in the hallway for 5 seconds, no introduction, didn't even say hi to each other, they just passed each other by. So why has she called her 6 times with the *67 prefix? They also found this like video. So there had been this video taken of somebody walking outside of Dave's apartment, and it had been uploaded to YouTube under an account using CARI's name, and they were actually able to trace the IP address of where this video was uploaded from, and it was uploaded from Liz's IP address, not CARI's. They also found an email which CARI had allegedly sent to Dave, and it said, "You will do exactly as I say, and then I will let her go. You will dump Liz, and you will start seeing me again. That's it. No arguments about it. As soon as you agree, I will let her go somewhere. I might give her phone back. If you don't agree, she will stay in my trunk, and since no one knows my car, you won't find her. So TikTok, you will call her phone and tell her what you have to get rid of her. Leave a voicemail and I will have her play it so I can hear. If not, then that's it. She dies in my trunk. So don't fuck with me. I am sick of her getting what belongs to me. You can't play with my feelings. Understand? Do it or say goodbye to her." And then attached to that email was a photo of Liz like bound and tied up in the back of a car trunk, which if you remember, I spoke about that in part 1, and he called Liz and was like, "Hey, are you in the back of a trunk?" And Liz was like, no. And he was like, okay, good. Well, they actually found that photo of Liz bound in the back of the trunk of the car on Liz's phone, and the metadata showed that it had been taken from Liz's phone. So Liz had duct taped her own mouth, she'd tied herself up and climbed in the back of a trunk, and then set up self-timer to take photos of herself, you know, gagged and tied up in the back of a car boot. Like, how unhinged is this woman? So detectives Doty and Avis go to CARI's mum Nancy and they tell her, look, we believe you. We don't believe she just up and left everyone. And Nancy is like, oh my God, finally. She was so so happy that they had come to speak to her and that they believed her, because now she was hopeful that something was actually going to be done about her daughter's case, which had just been pushed to the side for the last 2.5 years. Now, during this visit to Nancy, detectives actually find out something really interesting, right? So Nancy tells them that back in 2012, when all of this started, she had received a text from CARI basically saying she had sold all of her furniture and she wanted Nancy to let the buyer in to come and pick all of the furniture up. And attached to this text was a photo of a check from the buyer to prove that they had paid for all of the furniture. And turns out this check was signed for by Shana Goya, which, if you remember, is Liz's real name, Shana Elizabeth Goya. So everything is just linking back to Liz. Like, it's just another connection between these two women who apparently didn't even know each other. And then, if that wasn't enough, police are like, well, obviously, you know, this Liz woman is really sketchy, so let's go and test her fingerprints against the fingerprint that was found on the mint packet in Carrie's car when Carrie's car was recovered from Dave's parking lot. And lo and behold, it was an exact match to Liz's fingerprints. It was Liz's fingerprint found in Carrie's car. But unfortunately, that was not enough to arrest Liz yet. So they keep looking into her, they're trying to get some more evidence against her, and then in December of 2015, she actually comes to them. She comes to the sheriff's office that they're working at, and she goes to talk to another investigator. So Dodie and Avis go and kind of eavesdrop about, you know, what she's talking to this other investigator about. And she is actually filing another harassment report. So they see this opportunity and they're like, she's come to us, so let's take this opportunity to go and talk to her without kind of giving ourselves away that we're looking into her. So within 30 minutes of Liz leaving the sheriff's office, Detective Avis goes to her house in Council Bluff and he's like, look, you know, I heard about the harassment report that you were trying to file. I don't have a big workload at the moment, so I'd be happy to look into that for you. She's like, great, you know, come in. And he comes in, they have a chat, and he's recording the whole thing, and she tells him that she's filing a harassment report against CARI, and he's like, oh, you know, who's CARI? Just pretending he doesn't know who CARI is to kind of lower Liz's guard and get her to open up a bit more.
My sergeant you had just talked to, and he said that you were trying to file harassment.
Yeah, a harassment. The reports have been made against CARI FARVER.
And she basically tells him what he already knows, that she was dating Dave for about 2 weeks and now she's been harassing them for the past 2.5 years. But then she says that she actually doesn't believe that it's CARI who's been harassing them all this time anymore. She believes it's Dave's ex, Amy, the one that he dated for 12 years, has 2 children with. She's like, you know, it just doesn't make sense for her to be like this angry because they only dated for 2 weeks. It makes way more sense if Amy, who dated him for 12 years, has 2 kids with him, is actually impersonating CARI and harassing us because she wants to get back with him.
I'm not really sure if it really is CARI FARVER. They only dated for 2 weeks, and I don't understand why a person would still be stalking him almost 3 years later. It's getting ridiculous. She keeps stalking me on Facebook.
So Amy still would like to be with Dave?
I'm guessing, I don't know.
So Detective Avis is like, damn, that's crazy. You know, if you want, I can download the entire contents of your phone so we can go through it and we can try and trace where all of these texts and emails are coming from. And Liz is like, yeah, that would be great. And she lets him download her entire phone. Not the smartest cookie, I guess. And, you know, back when they downloaded her phone in 2013, she was the victim of a crime. She was the victim of being harassed by this crazy woman. But now, in 2015, when they're downloading her phone, they are downloading it as if she is a suspect. And she has no idea that they can download everything, even the things that she thinks she's deleted. So he downloads that and he leaves. And then before they even get to analyze the contents of it, things take another turn. And Dave actually calls the police, freaking out because he's gotten home and his gun is missing, and he's freaking out because he's got this unhinged ex who's been threatening him and threatening all the women he sees and threatening his ex-girlfriends, and he's just worried that she's taken it and she's gonna do something crazy with it. And the funny thing is, Liz had actually mentioned this before Dave noticed that the gun was missing. She noticed it in her interview with Detective Avis, and she said that she believed it was Amy who had stolen the gun. So on the 5th of December in 2015, 6 days after Dave's gun had gone missing, the police get a call from Liz Goya, who is at Big Lake Park in Iowa. And she had just gone there to, you know, clear her head, kind of get some air, and she had sat down on a park bench just to have a rest when all of a sudden this woman comes up from behind her, says, "How do you fucking like Dave?" They tell her to get on the ground, and then they shot her in the leg and ran away. So because she had like run into the woods, Liz felt safe enough to get up and run to her car, or, you know, walk as fast as she can with a bullet hole in her leg, because she had left her phone in the car. So she gets back to her car, she calls 911.
I've been shot in the leg. Oh, my leg is filled with blood. Oh, Jesus. The assailant still nearby? I don't think so. I took off running.
And the police arrive at the park and they're on high alert because there's this crazy woman with a gun who's, you know, run into the bushes. But they have a helicopter, they're searching on foot, and they cannot find this woman anywhere. So Liz was rushed straight to the hospital and she had been shot in the thigh. There was a lot of blood, but she was okay. There was going to be no permanent damage and she was going to make a full recovery. Police obviously questioned her and they're like, you know, do you know who did this? Did you see them? And at first she was like, oh, you know, they were behind me. I didn't really get to see their face. But then after a few hours, she changed her story and was like, oh, actually, it was Amy. And when Detective Avis found this out, he was like, excuse me? He just thought it was really sketchy because he was like, you know, just a few days beforehand, she had told him that Dave's gun had been stolen by no other than Amy. So immediately, he did not believe that Amy shot Liz. And the evidence just didn't point to anyone else having been in the park. So it was very quickly determined that Liz had actually shot herself. Like, this woman was a certified psycho. So Detective Avis goes and tells Dave that he believes that Liz is the one who has been harassing him for the past 3 years. And it all just clicks for Dave. I mean, it takes him a minute to process it because they had been getting texts while they were together sometimes. So he was just like, how did I miss this? Like, no time in the last 3 years did he ever question that it was CARI who was harassing them. He just couldn't believe it. He couldn't believe that this woman had tied herself up, put duct tape on her mouth, and then taken self-timers of it in the back of a car boot. He couldn't believe she had vandalized his shop while they were still dating. He couldn't believe that she had shot herself. He couldn't believe that she had set her own house on fire, killing her own 2 dogs, cat, and snake. Like, this is actually the most unhinged behavior I have ever heard of. It is insane. I'm at a loss for words. To kill her own animals and burn her own house down. And I mean, as you can imagine, Dave was pissed. He was like, if they don't arrest this woman soon, I am gonna kill her myself. So while all of this is going on, Detective Carver has been going through Liz's phone download, and he finds that she has made about 20 to 30 different email accounts under CARI's name. So like CARIFARVER@gmail.com or FARVERCARI@gmail.com. And every single message that was sent, every email that was sent, every account that was made, all of it could be linked back to Liz. He also found that Liz had been using an app to schedule texts so that her and Dave would get texts at the same time while they were together, which is obviously why Dave never suspected her, never suspected that it was anyone but CARI, because they would be sitting there and both their phones would start blowing up and they'd both look at each other and be like, oh, it's crazy CARI again. Turns out it was not crazy CARI, it was crazy Liz. Lunatic Liz. And you know, this must have been like a full-time job for her. Carver said that what she was doing would have taken her about 40 to 50 hours a week to be sending all these texts, sending all these emails, taking all these photos and videos and scheduling all of these messages. Like, it was full-time for her to be harassing herself and her boyfriend and everyone else that he would speak to. So then on the 14th of December in 2015, just under 2 weeks after Liz was shot, or Liz shot herself, Detectives Avis and Doty decide to bring her in for an interview. They tell her that CARI's missing and that they're trying to find her, and Liz is like, oh, you know, I barely know her. I just bypassed her in a hallway for 5 seconds and that was it. And so Detective Avis and Doty decide that they're going to tell her that they've actually found some remains and they believe those remains belong to CARI.
The case is regarding CARI FARVER. Are you familiar with her?
Barely even know her.
Yeah.
Ran into her one time.
Okay.
Just bypassing her, going into Dave's apartment to pick up my stuff.
We've had a pretty significant break in the case. Okay. There have been some remains that have been located. Anyone that you think would want to hurt CARI?
I didn't know her long enough to know if anybody wanted to hurt her.
So they ask her, do you know anybody that would want to hurt CARI? And she says, maybe Dave's ex Amy, like they were together for like 12 years, so like maybe she did it because she was jealous.
She was with him for 12 years and she still goes in and out of his life all the time, so.
Yeah. So you think she could have been the person that did some of that stuff to you?
I'm just saying, as another person who would be possessive of Dave, it would be her.
So then they took the opportunity to ask her if the next time Amy messages her pretending to be CARI harassing her, if she could kind of reply and get Amy to admit to killing CARI.
That's like gold to me if we had something like that.
Okay.
Because then we could start building a case.
Because they were hoping that she would confess to the murder, kind of let them know some details, how CARI was murdered, maybe where her body is, like all of these kind of details, but she would be telling them under the impression that they believed it was Amy who did these things. And they were thinking that she would do this because she wanted Amy out of the picture. And a few days later, Liz does just that. She plays right into their hand. She starts forwarding these emails to the detectives that are apparently from Amy, where Amy admits to shooting Liz in Big Lake Park. So then detectives take things one step further. They knew that it would pretty much be Liz's worst nightmare for Amy and Dave to get back together, so they kind of pushed Dave and Amy to move back in together. And then Liz forwards them another email, and let me read you this email, which Amy has apparently sent to her. So she goes, "I know your number from Dave's phone. I made the Outlook one so I could email you without Dave knowing. I don't want proof on my phone that I'm talking to you, Liz. Outlook got deleted, so I made this Hotmail one. I did meet up with CARI at a local place here in Council Bluffs. I have family that won't let me go to jail. So when I met Crazy CARI, she would not stop talking about Dave and him being her husband. She tried to attack me, but I attacked her with a knife. I stabbed her 3 to 4 times in the chest and the stomach area. I then took her out and burned her. I stuffed her body in a garbage can with crap. She was carried out to the dumpster, probably when Dave took out my garbage for me. So be glad that I did not do to you that way, Liz. I will never admit this to Dave or police, no one. Maybe I'm drunk now and just telling lies to you. Dave will always take care of me and protect me, so I will never go to jail. When I followed you that night I shot you, I left her kid at home because she was sleeping. Made sure I called Dave and texted him for my alibi, so you can never prove it was me, even though I can get into Dave's place with a key. Now I have him back with me and you're out of the picture, Liz. All your crap didn't keep him from me." And then shortly after that happens, Doty gets a call from Liz and she's crying, she's hysterical, and she tells him that she's pissed that Amy hasn't been arrested yet, despite all of this evidence that she's provided them with. And Doty tells her, well, we want to arrest her, but we just need some information that only the killer would know. And then a few days later, Liz forwards them an email from Amy where she basically says, "I really did kill CARI and I killed her in her own car." So the detectives go and they search CARI's car again. This is the 3rd time her car's being searched, but this time the detectives know exactly what they're looking for. So they look under the fabric from the passenger seat. They lift it up, they pulled it all off, and underneath they find this big red stain, and they sent it off for testing, and results showed that it was CARI's blood. So then, because the murder likely took place in Omaha, the Omaha Police Department have to get involved, and Detective Dave Schneider, who is a cold case detective from the Omaha Homicide Unit, he goes and he interviews Liz. And Liz actually has an unpaid traffic citation, which he uses to go and arrest her and bring her in without tipping her off about what the interview's about. And then when she's in the interview room, he confronts her with all of the evidence that Dodie, Avis, and Carver had gathered, you know, the photos on her phone, the IP addresses that trace back to her, the emails that were supposedly from Amy, and even with all of this evidence presented to her, she still denies everything.
Now, the reason why you're in this chair right now today is because you have a lot of questions that you need to answer for me. Her phone was at your house right after she disappeared. And I want to ask you how you can explain that to me, please.
She's never been to my house.
Your fingerprints are inside her vehicle. How would your fingerprints be inside her vehicle?
I don't know, because I've never been in her car.
You drove her car.
No, I didn't. I've never been inside her car. I've never even been around her car.
For years and years, people have been sending emails under CARI's fictitious accounts. The IP addresses show up to whose house? Your house.
I haven't had internet at my house.
And while she was in this interview, detectives Avis and Dodie actually got a search warrant for Liz's apartment, and inside her apartment they found CARI's camcorder, and on this camcorder they found footage of CARI from 2 days before she died, documenting the fact that her car had been vandalized, and they believe that Liz was the one who vandalized her car.
So Thursday night, apparently somebody here in the whopping metropolis of Macedonia, Iowa decided Max's Explorer was not the right color. We're gonna go see if we can fix that. Somebody thought they were quite the artist.
Investigators now believe it was Liz who vandalized the car.
And so on the 22nd of December in 2016, Liz Goya was finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecutor on the case was Douglas County Attorney Brenda Beadle, and she said that most homicides are dark. This one was bizarre to the point where it would take some convincing to make somebody believe that it actually happened. There was no way someone would let their dog die in a fire that they started. There's no way that someone would shoot themselves in the femur. So the trial was due to start in 2017, and just a couple of months before the trial was going to start, Dave remembered that he had this tablet in storage, and he handed it over to investigators, and Detective Carver found a micro SD card in the tablet that used to be in Liz's phone at around the time of the murder, mind you, and everything had been wiped from it, but Detective Carver was able to recover everything that was deleted. There was a ton of photos on this SD card that had been deleted, and one of the photos was of a foot with a tattoo on it, and the tattoo was of a Chinese symbol, which was the symbol for mother. And that was actually the exact same tattoo that CARI had. And so Liz had killed CARI and then was taking photos of her dead body. So Liz's defense attorney was James Martin Davis, and he was kind of like a local legend in Omaha. He was a very well-known defense attorney, and he saw quite a few holes in the prosecution's argument at first, like the murder weapon. There was no murder weapon, there was no body, there was no proof that CARI even died. But even during the trial, he was shocked by how cooked Liz was. He said, and I quote, "I would think to myself without disclosing my feelings to the client, I thought, holy Christ, this is despicable. But it doesn't mean that they're a first-degree cold-blooded murderer." Sometimes I think it does, but you know. During the trial, Liz was just totally emotionless. She was totally unfazed, even in the most graphic and damning testimony. And eventually she was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 18 to 20 years for arson. And since 2017, she has been at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women, and she still claims the real killer is out there and that she won't stop fighting until she's free and they find the right person. So basically, she's delusional. Obviously, this case had a huge impact on so many people. I mean, first of all, CARI's family. I cannot imagine how hard this would have been for her mother and her son and her friends and her family to not only lose their daughter, their mother, their friend, their family, but to have some batshit crazy woman pretending to be her, messaging them, still giving them hope that she's alive. And not only that, but also pretending to be CARI and acting like she is this batshit crazy person who's harassing her ex-boyfriend who she only dated for 2 weeks and every other woman he dates. You know, making her out to be a bad person. person. It's just horrible. It's also had a huge impact on Dave, obviously. I mean, still to this day, he is paranoid. He doesn't trust anyone. I mean, fair enough. Imagine being stalked and harassed for 3 years, and it's actually by the person who has been sitting by you through that whole 3 years. I cannot imagine what that would do to you. And also, thank God for Detectives Doty, Avis, and Carver for reopening the case and getting CARI the justice that she deserves. But that is everything for this case. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below on this one, because it is a wild ride. Like, truly, when I told you that this is one of the craziest cases I've ever looked into, like, seriously, this woman killed her own dogs, cat, and snake. She shot herself in the leg. That is some next level psychotic behavior. So I can't wait to discuss with you guys in the comments what you think. But that's all from me today. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.